when Clark called and asked me to be the keynote speaker for the afternoon, of course I said yes, because I'm running a campaign. I was like, so yeah, you got to be in front of people. But when I hung up, I said, what did I just agree to do? But I'm thankful for Clark. I'm thankful for this People's Campaign and for his mission and for his drive to continue putting important issues in front of the people. The overall theme for today's conference is chaos or community. And, if you're like me and you read the news and you see the headlines and you see Facebook and you see Twitter, that question comes up often probably in your mind. Is this chaos or community? Or how I like to say it is this real life? Is this happening right now? And it's so often that we say this because chaos breeds apathy and chaos breeds complacency. Chaos breeds helplessness and it breeds doubt. It breeds paralysis and it breeds stagnancy. And so the question is a very important question. Is this chaos or community? But the assignment that I was given, Representative Scott dealt with chaos or community, but the assignment I was given is how do we get to community? How do we reach community? And that's what I initially thought when I was preparing this is, what does that mean? How do we reach community? How do we get out to the community? But the more I kept thinking about it, it wasn't how we reach community, but it's more of how do we become community? How do we in this room become community? And so as I started looking, community is this elusive thing that has eluded us in 2018. What does it look like? What does it feel like? But in order to get to community, you have to know what you're looking for. The definition of community, when you look at Merriam-Webster, it is a group or an organization or a bunch of folks together who have something in common. Some similarities, have commonalities. And so in base terms, it means that characteristics, whether it be race, ethnicity, where you live, your opinions or your views, that would be what community is. But I think that that's too trite of a definition for community. Because what's that saying is that I have to be like you and I have to be similar to you to be community, and I don't think that that's what community truly is. I think for us to get to community, we have to know what it is that we're looking for. And so the more I started thinking about this question that Clark wanted us to answer is how do we get to community? How do we become community? I then started thinking and I started doing what I normally do. I meditate with my music because I was a vocal music major and that's my thing. So I started meditating with my best friend in my music, and that best friend is Whitney Houston. So y'all who know me know that that's my best friend. And we're so much best friends that my dad was born on her birthday. My son was born on her birthday, and may she rest in peace. She would have been 55, but she's my best friend. So she talks to me through her music. And so as I started thinking about, again, how do we get to community, I then began to think about that song that she and her husband wrote together. Bobby Brown, we have something in common. And the thing about it is that when they wrote that song, they were trying to convince all of us that they were supposed to be together, because we all know that Bobby and Whitney were not supposed to be together. Can we all agree on that? Okay. Whitney was our precious Whitney, and then there was Bobby. But as I sit there, that song is like we have something in common. But when I began to listen to the lyrics of the song, it has nothing to do about them having something actually in common, but it was more about we have something in common based on how we treat one another. That we have one another's back, that we will be there for each other and we will support one another. That we will fight for each other and we will go with and show up for one another. That's what it says. And I believe in talking about how we get to community, I submit to you, community has less to do with how we are alike, less to do with how we are similar, but more of whether you'll show up for me. Community has to do with whether you'll fight for me. Community has something to do with whether you will support me. Representative Scott, she quoted Black Panther earlier, and it says, we must find a way to look after one another as if we are all one single tribe. That's what community is. It's whether or not you will support each other, whether we will fight for each other, or whether we'll show up for each other. That's what community is. And as I began to keep on saying, but how do we get there? How do we get to community? And back in the day, before there was Google and before there was maps and all of that kind of thing, in order to take a trip, you had to go to AAA to get those little maps. I know there's some people in here that remember that, some folks that don't. There's I understand, that's okay. But, okay, yes, I got an amen over here in this corner. So yes, we had maps that we had to go get in order to get where we wanted to do from AAA. And so what I submit to you, to get to community, let's look at the AAAs. We must align, we must advocate, and we must activate. We must align, we must advocate, and we must activate. In order to get to community, we must align. Align means that we affiliate, we associate with, we are allies, and we support each other. Somewhere along the way, we have taken support to mean just words only. How many of us have heard those folks that they're well-meaning folks that say, I support you, I got your back, I'm rooting for you, which those are good because we need to hear that. But support means that I feel something. Support is something tangible. Support is that when you see your sister or your brother going through something, that you're willing to bear that with them. That's what support is. Support is tangible. This building that we're in, it is held up with support beams. And the thing about support beams is that the more load and the more pressure that you put on the beam, there are different pressure points, support pressure points, that they will give so that the beam won't break. So when you're going through something and when we're experiencing things, true support means that I'm there to carry the weight with you so you don't break. That's what support means. So we have to get to the point, in order to get to community, that we're willing to support each other enough that we don't let our brother and sister break. Because we recognize that there is chaos, but we have to be willing to get to community. If I say I support you, I'm willing to place the burden on myself as well and bear the burden. In order to get to a place of community, we must align and support one another, but we also must advocate. To advocate or be an advocate is one who's willing to stand in the gap, someone who's willing to plead on the other's behalf, one who's willing to be a zealous advocate and fight as if it was for yourself. As a prosecutor, I remember the worst cases that I would have would be when the defense attorney would come in the room and they would just say very glibly, well, it doesn't matter to me because I'm going home tonight. Because I knew then that I was only going to have to be the prosecutor, but also be the defense attorney too, because they weren't concerned about advocating for their client. To be a true advocate is being willing to fight for one another. Sometimes we see one another in a fight and we stand and we look outside because we say, that's not my fight. And I believe that when we see one another in a fight, we have to be willing to take off our earrings and get in the fight too. People who know me, that's how I do. That's me. You know that song, it's Kiki, are you with me? It's Melissa, are you with me? Am I riding? Yes, I am. Because I'm willing to fight for you, because that's what community is. I remember my oldest sister, I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and you know Baltimore, short for be more careful. And my oldest sister was in a fight. You know, she was running her mouth about this guy that she was with, and she kept talking to these other girls, and they kept telling her, we're going to gang you after school. We're going to jump you after school. And she kept running her mouth, And so true enough, they jumped her after school. And this is my oldest sister, Jackie, and my sister right below her, Daisy, was there, and she witnessed the whole thing and saw it. And so as they walked home and they got to the house, my mother looks at Jackie and is like, well, what happened to you? And she tried to explain her way out of what happened. And so as she got on Jackie and said, you need to keep your mouth shut, because evidently your mouth has written a check that your butt couldn't cash. And so as she's talking with Jackie, she then looks over at Daisy and she says, well, if your sister was getting jumped, what did you do? Because you look awfully clean. So I will tell you that day that not only did Jackie get in trouble, but Daisy did too, because she wasn't willing to jump in the fight with her. So when your brother and your sister is in the fight, how many of us can say that we're willing to fight too? How many of us are willing? I got some hands over here, so let's try that again. How many of us are willing to say that we're willing to fight too? So we have to be willing to say that even though it's not my fight today, it might be my fight tomorrow. Even though it may not be what I'm going through today, tomorrow still is there. There's still something that may affect me. So even though the fight may not affect me today, it may affect me tomorrow. And I'm going to want somebody to jump in that fight with me. So when we're talking about getting to community, not only it is that we align and support one another and also advocate and fight for each other, but we also must activate. Being active means we're galvanizing, we're stimulating, and we're moving. In order to be community, we must do something. We must be something, and we must move. There must be a visible effort and action taken. It must be taken together. Being a child of the 80s, this morning when I left out of the house, my 6-year-old was sitting on the recliner with his Nintendo Switch because he doesn't remember the good times when on Saturday morning you got to watch your cartoons. Y'all remember the good times when we used to be able to, wake up and you excited. We had the Smurfs and we had the Super Friends and we had all of those good cartoons, and that was the time that you got to just de-escalate for the week. That is after your mama made you clean the whole house, but you still got to be able to watch your cartoons. And so I remember the Saturday morning cartoons, and there was the group of Super Friends. You had Superman and Batman and Aquaman and all that, but there was a less known characters of the Wonder Twins. When the Wonder Twins found themselves in sticky situations and anything that was going on, in order to fight their enemy, they would reach out and touch each other and say, "Wonder Twins, activate." But it wouldn't work no matter how many times they said it if they weren't willing to do it together. If they weren't willing to touch one another and do it together. And I submit to you that community doesn't work if we're not willing to touch one another and do it together. It has to be that effort of Wonder Twins, activate. And so even when they did this, and I put it in layman terms that our brother Neo said it best, I'm a movement by myself, but I'm a force when we're together because you make me better. And that's what we have to realize. For some reason, we have celebrated the individualized hero instead of the collective effort of the whole. If the desire is to create positive change, it is important that we must do it as a people together. There is more power in a group of people with capacity. There's more power with a group that has talent. There's more power in a group with intelligence. There's more power when it's a group of a community. We must learn that we have to support each other. We will have to fight for each other, and we have to show up for each other in order to be community. We must align with one another. We must advocate for each other, and we must activate. So ending as I started, when we're looking at it and we're looking at, is it chaos or community? Our sister Barksdale said to us, we hope that we choose community. Reading the headlines and reading the timelines and reading the news feeds, we know that there is chaos all around us. Chaos has produced apathy, it has produced complacency, it has produced doubt, and it has produced paralysis and stagnancy. But because we are willing from this day forward to align with one another, because from this day forward we're willing to advocate for each other, because from this day forward we're willing to activate together, we know that we can move from apathy to action. We know that we can move from complacency to commitment. We know that we can move from doubt to dedication. We know that we can move from paralysis to productivity. We know that we can move from being helpless to being oh so very hopeful. We know that we can move from being stagnant from being stagnant to being steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work. Because y'all know I'm a preacher too. So always abounding in the work, knowing that our work is not in vain. So in order to get to community, we have to realize that we have to move from the chaos into community. I thank you all for listening today.